What hurricane names have been retired?
Hurricane names are retired when a particularly bad storm has caused a great deal of damage and loss of life. Countries affected by such hurricanes will petition the WMO to have the name retired and replaced with a new name. Gustav and Ike, both 2008 hurricanes, may also be retired.
How were kites once used in early meteorology?
Sites, when skillfully designed and flown, can reach extraordinary heights. The world record for a single kite being flown is 14,509 feet, 4,422 meters. The record was set in Kincardine, Ontario, Canada, on August 12, 2000, by Richard Synergy. Much greater heights may be achieved, however, when multiple kites are linked together. A chain of 10 kites set an American record in 1910, rising to 23,385 feet, 7,128 meters. And a collection of 8 kites reached 31,955 feet, 9,740 meters, in Lindenberg, Germany. In 1919. The earliest record of kites being used for meteorology comes from the University of Glasgow, where in 1749 two students, Alexander Wilson and Thomas Melville, wanted to measure conditions in the upper atmosphere. Since there were no airplanes or hot air balloons at the time, they used a kite.
Does Earth's magnetic field ever change?
Yes, the magnetic field is constantly changing, though very slowly. The magnetic poles actually drift several kilometers each year, often in seemingly random directions. Over thousands of years, the strength of the magnetic field can go up and down significantly. Even more amazing, Earth's magnetic field can reverse directions. The North magnetic pole becomes the South magnetic pole, and vice versa. According to scientific measurements, our planet's magnetic field last had a polarity reversal about 800,000 years ago.
Will water supplies be threatened by global warming?
There are a number of regions around the globe where populations get their drinking water from snow melting off of nearby mountains and draining into rivers. One area in the United States particularly threatened by global warming is Southern California. The snow on top of the nearby Sierra Nevadas is disappearing. And winters are not bringing the snow back as much as they once did. Los Angeles and other cities are increasingly plagued by water shortages as a result. Current estimates guess that 25% of the snowpack in the state will be gone by 2050. causing major stress on a state that has seen massive population growth. Meanwhile, drought in the southwest has caused lakes and rivers to dry up. Economic losses as a result of crop damage, livestock deaths, and loss of tourism in the region were estimated to be around $1.3 billion.
What are the National Centers for Environmental Prediction, NCEP?
Part of the National Weather Service, the National Centers for Environmental Prediction include the following centers: the Aviation Weather Center for monitoring weather conditions that could prove hazardous to airplane and space flights. The Climate Prediction Center is focused on how climate affects the country, as well as on short-term climate changes. The Environmental Monitoring Center is a research center studying ways to improve weather-related sciences, including climatology, hydrology, and ocean weather prediction. The Hydrometeorological Prediction Center provides rain forecasts for the upcoming week. The Ocean Prediction Center is responsible for issuing ocean weather warnings in the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans north of the 30th degree parallel. The Space Weather Prediction Center warns of weather conditions on Earth and in space that could put space missions at risk. The Storm Prediction Center keeps a watchful eye on tornadoes, hurricanes, and other hazardous weather within the lower 48 U.S. states. The Tropical Prediction Center monitors tropical weather systems within the United States, as well as surrounding regions.
What are halcyon days?
This term is often used to refer to a time of peace or prosperity. Among sailors, it is the 2-week period of calm weather before and after the shortest day of the year, approximately December 21st. The phrase is taken from halcyon, the name the ancient Greeks gave to the kingfisher. According to legend, the halcyon built its nest on the surface of the ocean and was able to quiet the winds while its eggs were hatching.
What is the global average temperature?
Data on temperatures for the 20th century, which includes both land and ocean surface temperatures, averaged to 53.6 degrees Fahrenheit 12 degrees Celsius. A 2007 assessment showed that, during the early years of the 21st century, average temperatures were already up 1.28 degrees Fahrenheit 0.71 degrees Celsius compared to the previous century averages. This data includes a very warm year in 2002, though 1998 was actually the warmest year since 1990. And the fact that, taken by themselves, land surface temperatures have been particularly warmer, 3.4 degrees Fahrenheit 1.89 degrees Celsius. Ocean surface temperatures in 2007 were the fourth warmest in a record database spanning 128 years.
What are the doldrums?
Sailors used to call the low-pressure area near the equator the doldrums because winds here tend to be very light and variable and, thus, difficult to sail in. The doldrums are found near where the trade winds originate. The expression in the doldrums has come to mean a person who is feeling inactive, listless, or lethargic.
Is the best time to see an aurora during the winter?
Seasons don't have anything to do with whether or not aurorae will occur over the polar regions. Rather, they are related to solar storms. However, it may be more likely that you will see aurorae during the winter because the nights are longer.
What is a certified consulting meteorologist, CCM?
The American Meteorological Society, AMS, grants the title of CCM to professional meteorologists who have both broad experience in meteorology and a highly specialized knowledge of particular fields on which they intend to consult. In addition to education and experience, a meteorologist has to demonstrate professional conduct and service to be named a CCM. They are sought out by law firms, governments, law enforcement agencies, insurance companies, and other private businesses for their expertise and for the assurance that all CCMs will provide reliable and authoritative information. Only about 5% of AMS members are CCMs. The AMS provides a listing of CCMs by specialty on its website at http://www.amtsoc.org.
What is La Nina?
It's pretty easy to guess that La Nina would be the opposite of El Niño. Instead of warm waters in the tropical Pacific, the surface waters are inordinately cool. In 2009, predictions were for a La Nina to dominate Pacific waters.
What are cheronophobia and brontophobia?
Cheronophobia is the fear of lightning. And brontophobia, sometimes called tonitrophobia, is the fear of thunder.
What are the westerlies?
These winds flow at mid-latitudes, 30 to 60 degrees north and south of the equator, from west to east around the Earth. The high-altitude winds known as the jet stream are also westerlies.
What is smog?
The word smog is a combination of two other words, smoke and fog. Harold de Vaux, a British physician who was concerned about air quality, is credited with coming up with coining the term in 1911. However, what we refer to as smog has nothing to do with either fog or smoke, usually. Smog is simply another name for air pollution. Scientists refer to it, more precisely, as photochemical smog because it is the result of chemical reactions in the presence of sunlight. The brownish haze associated with smog is the result of nitrogen dioxide in the air. But smog also includes a soup of nitrogen oxides, hydrocarbons, aldehydes, ozone, peroxyethanoyl nitrates, PANs, and suspended particulate matter. Yuck.
Is the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA, involved in weather forecasting?
Since NASA is involved in implementing weather satellites, it obviously is very much involved in weather forecasting. NASA doesn't only concern itself with sending out manned and unmanned missions into the solar system and beyond. It also spends a lot of time observing the Earth. Weather and Earth science satellites gather information about changes in the climate, land use, and in our oceans.
What is LiDAR?
You can think of LiDAR as being the equivalent of a light radar. Meteorologists can use laser beams pointed at the atmosphere to measure such things as pollution concentrations and wind velocity.
Who invented the modern thermometer?
Ferdinand II de' Medici, 1610–1670, Grand Duke of Tuscany, was also an accomplished physicist. He is generally credited with inventing the first modern thermometer in 1641. It consisted of a sealed tube containing alcohol. This type of thermometer was called a spirit thermometer, possibly because alcoholic drinks are sometimes referred to as spirits. Today, alcohol thermometers are still referred to by this quaint label. Ferdinand II improved on his design in 1654, 10 years later, Robert Hooke, 1635–1703, adapted the Duke's thermometer, standardizing the measurements in a more logical way. The Duke had arbitrarily divided his thermometer into 50 degrees, using the freezing and boiling points of water as standards.
To what professional societies and organizations should a meteorologist belong?
Most meteorologists in the United States participate as active members of the American Meteorological Society. Those specifically interested in the atmospheric sciences often also join the American Geophysical Union, which is headquartered in Washington, D.C. Meteorologists specializing in forecasting can join the National Weather Association for its benefits. The NWA is also concerned with the operational aspects of meteorology.
What do many scholars believe caused the flood that Noah and his family survived in the Bible?
Some archaeologists believe that, sometime between the years 5400 BCE and 5200 BCE, the Euphrates River flooded the surrounding valley, covering an area of about 40,000 square miles, about 104,000 square kilometers. Although this flood did not encompass the globe, to those living in the area it certainly would have seemed like the end of the world, and it could have inspired the well-known biblical story.
How does the Gulf Stream affect the weather of the British Isles and Scandinavia?
The Gulf Stream currents move warm water in the Atlantic Ocean from the Caribbean Sea northeast to northern Europe and the British Isles. The current flows in this manner because currents heading west from the South Atlantic run into Central America. If North and South America were not connected by this relatively thin strip of land, the current would continue to flow westward and none of the warmer waters would reach Europe, Scotland, Ireland, England, Wales, and the Scandinavian countries would have climates more closely resembling Greenland's. When you look at a world map, you will notice that England, for instance, is at a latitude north of Newfoundland. Logically, it should be a lot colder there than it is, but thanks to the Gulf Stream, England has a climate more like that of New York City than northern Canada. Indeed, mainland Europe is warmer than North America because the Gulf Stream brings warmer weather with it.
How have dams affected the planet's water cycle in a significant way?
Currently, there are about 40,000 large dams, dams higher than 15 feet 5 meters. In the world, with 19,000 of those being in China and about 5,500 in the United States. By erecting dams that block effectively 15% of the fresh water flow on the planet's surface, people have changed the Earth's water cycle significantly. Water cycle changes can, in turn, change such things as temperature and cloud formation. Naturally, the bigger the dam, and the reservoir created behind it, the greater the effect. China's Three Gorges Dam, located on the Yangtze River. Is a huge dam that creates 20 times the kilowatts as America's famous Hoover Dam. The reservoir created by Three Gorges contains over 5 trillion gallons, 19 trillion liters of water and is over 400 square miles, 1,036 square kilometers, in surface area. Scientists have observed that the climate around the dam has cooled and that rainfall has also changed.
How was seafloor spreading discovered?
In the 1950s, scientists realized that as igneous rocks cool and solidify, crystallize, magnetic minerals align with the Earth's magnetic field like tiny compass needles, essentially locking the magnetic field into the rock. In other words, rocks with magnetic minerals act like fossils of the magnetic field, allowing scientists to read the rock and determine the magnetic field from the geologic past. This is called paleomagnetism. The idea was proposed by Harry Hess, 1906 to 1969, a Princeton University geologist and U.S. Naval Reserve Rear Admiral, and independently by Robert Dietz, a scientist with the U.S. Coast and Geodetic Survey, both of whom published similar theories that became known as seafloor spreading. In 1962, Hess proposed the idea of seafloor spreading, but had no proof. As Hess formulated his hypothesis, Dietz independently proposed a similar model, which differed by noting the sliding surface was at the base of the lithosphere, not at the base of the crust. Support for Hess's and Dietz's theories came only 1 year later. British geologists Frederick Vine and Drummond Matthews discovered the periodic magnetic reversals in the Earth's crust, taking data from around mid-ocean ridges. Seafloor spreading areas, Vine noted the magnetic fields of magnetic minerals showed reversed polarity. The Earth's magnetic field has reversed its polarity around 170 times in the last 80 million years. From the spreading center outward, there was a pattern of alternating magnetic polarity on the ocean floor, swaths of opposing polarity on each side of the ridge. As the spreading center continues to grow, new swaths develop, pushing away material on either side of the ridge. Thus, these strips of magnetism were used as evidence of lithospheric plate movement and of seafloor spreading.
What is tephra?
Tephra is the name given to all the material that erupts from a volcano, excluding lava. Tephra comes in all shapes and sizes, and is also referred to as pyroclastic material, fire particles. A pyroclast is material that is ejected during the explosive eruption of a volcano in the form of fragments. Pyroclastic material that is hot enough to fuse together before it falls to the ground is called welded or volcanic tuff. Geologists classify tephra according to size. The following lists the most common types of tephra. Ash is material smaller than approximately 1/10 of an inch. 2 millimeters, that is emitted from an erupting volcano. It can also contain lapilli, also called cinders or little stones, which is between 1 and 25 inches, 2 and 64 centimeters. In a large eruption, ash can accumulate to a great thickness and spread out for thousands of miles. Usually in the direction of the prevailing winds. Blocks are solid rock emitted from an erupting volcano. They can be anywhere from the size of a baseball to the size of a boulder as large as a house. Bombs are volcanic rocks that are still molten inside. They are shaped by their passage through the air. They form the brilliant arc seen in time-lapse photography of volcanic eruptions. Typically ranging from baseball to basketball size, they can be as large as a house. Bombs, and blocks, can be ejected from a volcano with initial velocities greater than 1,000 miles. 1,609 kilometers per hour, and can travel more than 3 miles, 5 kilometers. With some exploding and gushing molten rock when they eventually strike the ground. There are also certain types of bombs, including spindle bombs. Very fluid magma chunks that are streamlined as they fly through the air, and bread crust, which is formed from viscous magma, creating rounded blobs that often have fractured surfaces.
Why does lightning flicker?
Once the path is established through which the electricity of the lightning will flow, the same path will be followed for a number of milliseconds before it breaks down. Several strokes of lightning, each lasting millionths of a second, will be interspersed with brief pauses lasting for periods of time just as short. The result is a flickering effect.
When a weatherman says that the wind direction is westerly, does that mean the wind is coming from the west or that it is blowing towards the west?
Wind directions expressed by meteorologists and the National Weather Service indicate which direction the wind is coming from rather than where it is blowing. So, if an area is experiencing northwest winds, for example, it means that the wind is coming from the northwest and blowing toward the southeast. In other words, high-pressure zones contain more densely packed molecules of various gases, which tend to flow to areas where the air is less dense. This concept was first explained by the Greek philosopher Anaximander. C 610 B.C.EC 546 BCE, who explained that wind was a natural phenomenon and not caused by the gods or by trees waving their leaves, as some people thought.
Is there a difference between a forecast of partly sunny or partly cloudy skies?
Yes. The difference is that partly cloudy refers to a sky that is mostly clear with some clouds in it. while partly sunny is a sky that has more cloud cover than clear patches.
What is an ice storm?
Ice storms account for some of the most dangerous winter conditions one can experience. Ice storms occur when freezing rain accumulates on the ground, building up layers of glaze or rime that coat everything, from roads to buildings to telephone lines and vegetation. Naturally, this makes driving extremely hazardous, and many people have lost their lives while traveling in ice storms. Airports will often cancel flights as ice forming on wings can prevent airplane wing flaps from moving, even when workers repeatedly de-ice them. Ice storms can down power lines and even cause older trees to collapse under the sheer weight of frozen water. For example, a tree 50 feet tall with a branch circumference averaging 20 feet can be weighed down by 10,000 pounds. About 4,500 kilograms of ice as a result of an ice storm.
What is inadvertent weather modification?
This, of course, means accidentally changing the weather, usually for the worse. Humanity has been very good at that, especially as a result of activities that lead to deforestation and pollution. It is now common knowledge that chemicals from cars and industry are destroying the ozone. And particulates from emissions also have an effect on precipitation. Cutting down forests in favor of croplands, urban construction, golf courses, and so on causes more sunlight to be reflected back into the atmosphere but can also cause urban heat islands. Animal agriculture can increase methane gas in the atmosphere. And irrigation of plants alters water distribution. All of these activities and more have noticeably changed natural weather patterns and the climate without humans intending to do so.
Is it dangerous to touch a person who has just been struck by lightning?
No. A common myth is that people who have been hit by lightning maintain a dangerous electrical charge that can be transmitted to someone else who touches the victim. Actually, no such residual charge will remain and it is safe to touch them and give them medical assistance.
What is humidifier fever?
If you do not clean your humidifier according to the manufacturer's recommendations, bacteria and mold may begin to grow on it, which could make you sick. Also, distilled water, not tap water, should be used in a humidifier because dissolved minerals in tap water can cause a fine white powder to blow in your home that can also encourage germs to spread. Though a variety of illnesses, ranging from allergic reactions to the common cold, could develop as a result. If they stem from a poorly maintained humidifier, they might all be classified as humidifier fever.
How many active volcanoes are there?
Currently, there are somewhere between 850 and 1,500 known active volcanoes on our planet. There are 63 active volcanoes in the United States, mostly in Alaska, Hawaii, and in the Pacific Northwest. At any given time, about 10 or 12 volcanoes are erupting planet-wide.
What is meteorology?
Meteorology is the scientific study of the weather and, more specifically, how changes in the weather may be forecasted.
How were the first high-altitude photographs of clouds taken?
During World War II, cameras were mounted aboard some of Germany's V-2 rockets to take pictures of cloud patterns. The success of these efforts inspired meteorologists to plan for weather satellites.
Why do you sometimes see double rainbows?
Sometimes rainbows form that have a fainter twin called a supernumerary rainbow. The twin will be bigger and above the first rainbow, and the colors of the bands will be reversed. This occurs when not all of the light is reflected out of the raindrops at once. Some light energy remains, and is reflected within the droplets before emerging as a second rainbow.
Can you use snow to keep you warm?
Snow, just like wood or stone or soil, can be used as an insulator. If there is sufficient snow on the ground, one can dig out a small cave or igloo-like structure, crawl inside of it, and wait for one's body heat to warm the inside. To work more efficiently, it is best to be 6 or more feet, 2 meters, below the surface, and keep the opening of your snow cave downwind. Such makeshift structures can warm up to 60 degrees Fahrenheit 15 degrees Celsius or more, and can be quite cozy. They are a good way to avoid exposure if one has become lost or stranded outdoors in the winter.
What is sea level air pressure?
The air pressure at sea level averages 29.92 inches of mercury, or 1013.25 millibars, MB. No matter what their elevations, weather stations calculate barometric pressures in their area according to what they would be at sea level. In this way, reports remain consistent everywhere.
Has the weather ever been responsible for killing a U.S. president?
When U.S. President William Henry Harrison 1773 to 1841, gave his inaugural address on March 4, 1841, the weather was miserable. Despite snow and bitter cold, President Harrison insisted on remaining outside and giving one of the longest inaugural addresses ever, 1 hour and 45 minutes. At 68 years old, the former general and war hero was not in the most robust health, and many blamed the weather conditions as the cause of President Harrison's subsequent pneumonia. 1 month after becoming president, he died, thus earning him the distinction of the U.S. president serving the shortest term in office.
Why is the thermosphere so hot?
While the temperature of the thermosphere can exceed 3,600 degrees Fahrenheit 1,982 degrees Celsius, the atmosphere here is so thin that an ordinary thermometer would not register this temperature. A regular thermometer would indicate temperatures below freezing. Instead, special instruments are used to measure the speed of the few particles that are in the thermosphere, and these indicate the extraordinary highs. Atoms and molecules in the thermosphere are excited by radiation from outer space.
If ozone is good for us, why do we hear about ozone alerts and bad ozone?
Ozone is great when it is high up in the atmosphere and doing its job of protecting us from radiation. But when it is down near ground level, it is toxic to those who breathe it in. Car exhaust fumes and other sources of pollution include ozone, which is seen in smog. Ozone pollution can make people sick and damage crops. Small amounts of ozone are also produced by electrical storms. If you have ever performed electricity experiments in a high school or college laboratory, you might be familiar with the ozone smell produced by even small bolts of electricity.
What are Aitken nuclei?
The discovery that the air is full of tiny particles around which water droplets may condense to create clouds was made by Scottish physicist John Aitken, 1839 to 1919. We usually just call them nuclei today, but, more formally, these particles are called Aitken nuclei.
Who first proposed the approach of numerical weather prediction?
Wilhelm Bjerknes, 1862 to 1951, a Norwegian physicist and meteorologist. Was the author of the first formal studies on weather forecasting. He was also famous for his seminal 1921 book, On the Dynamics of the Circular Vortex with applications to the atmosphere and to atmospheric vortex and wave motion, which proposed the fundamental ideas behind numerical weather prediction in 1904. The theory was picked up again in 1922 by English mathematician and meteorologist Lewis F. Richardson. 1881 to 1953, the mathematics behind Bjerknes's theory appealed to Richardson, but the calculations necessary to come up with the predictions. In a time before the invention of the computer, were formidable. Richardson estimated it would take a coordinated effort of about 26,000 people using calculators to figure out the math fast enough for the numerical method to work. Trying to do some preliminary calculations himself. Richardson's early attempts at weather predictions were far off the mark. His misunderstanding of some of Bjerknes's numerical methods led him to come up with estimates on air pressure that were far too high. Because of Richardson's failure, numerical weather prediction was abandoned until the 1940s.
Is meteorology considered a good career?
Meteorology is certainly one of the better careers you can go into in terms of income, stress level, satisfaction, working environment, physical demands, and employment outlook. In its ranking of 250 careers in the United States, the 6th, 2002 edition of the Jobs Ranked Almanac placed meteorologist as 13th. While this is somewhat lower than the 7th ranking it earned in the previous edition, it is a lot higher than the 38th place it had in the 4th edition, so it seems to be moving up.
Where is the best place to hide from a tornado if I'm outdoors?
If there is no other shelter around, storm experts usually recommend that you find a trench or ditch if a tornado is approaching and you don't have time to get to a tornado shelter or basement. It is not a good idea to hide under a freeway overpass, as debris can still easily blow inside and prove deadly. Some people believe that you are safer if you are in a mountain valley, because the mountains will block tornadoes. Actually, tornadoes have swept through valleys, and they have even touched on mountain peaks. Tornadoes have been recorded in the Teton Wilderness area at elevations of more than 10,000 feet, 3,000 meters. And during the super tornado outbreak of 1974 many tornadoes struck high areas of the Appalachians. There is also a myth that standing near a river is a safe place to be during a tornado warning. Again, there have been a number of incidents during which tornadoes have been spotted near or even crossing streams and rivers as big as the Mississippi and Missouri. It is not unheard To learn of boats that have been sunk while sailing down a river when a tornado struck.
What is a derecho?
Pronounced derecho, this is large, long-lived thunderstorm characterized by strong wind downbursts.
Will water supplies be threatened by global warming?
There are a number of regions around the globe where populations get their drinking water from snow melting off of nearby mountains and draining into rivers. One area in the United States particularly threatened by global warming is Southern California. The snow on top of the nearby Sierra Nevadas is disappearing. And winters are not bringing the snow back as much as they once did. Los Angeles and other cities are increasingly plagued by water shortages as a result. Current estimates guess that 25% of the snowpack in the state will be gone by 2050. Causing major stress on a state that has seen massive population growth. Meanwhile, drought in the southwest has caused lakes and rivers to dry up. Economic losses as a result of crop damage, livestock deaths, and loss of tourism in the region were estimated to be around $1.3 billion.
Is the hole in the ozone layer causing frog species extinctions?
Biologists have known for a long time that frogs are very vulnerable to changes in their environment. Frogs across the globe were being found with deformities, such as extra legs, and species were going extinct. By the mid-1990s, it was still being speculated that the cause of the mutations was the weakened ozone layer, which was allowing too much ultraviolet radiation to filter onto the planet. Today, however, most scientists believe that the culprit is fertilizers leaking into the lakes and rivers where frogs live. The fertilizers cause certain types of snail species to thrive, and these snails often host parasites. The parasites, in turn, infect frogs when they are still in their tadpole stage. Cysts form on the tadpoles, which creates the mutations that are being observed. Besides the malformations seen in frogs, there is another, even more troubling concern. Many species of frogs, some estimate about 100 species, are vulnerable or threatened with extinction, and many others have already disappeared. In this case, the culprit is global warming. Because frogs have thin skin, they are vulnerable to environmental changes. Increased temperatures have caused fungi. Some scientists specifically blame the chytrid fungus to infect frog skin. And this leads to the lethal disease Batrachochythrium dendrobatitis, BD. The good news is that it is easy to treat and cure frogs. The bad news is that even if they are treated, once released back into the wild they are likely to be reinfected. To help arrest the extinction rate, zoos around the world have been rescuing sample populations and breeding them in captivity.
How was Abu Ali al-Hasan ibn al-Haytham important to meteorology?
Abu Ali al-Hasan ibn 965 c. 1039, was a brilliant scientist in many areas, including engineering, physics, philosophy, mathematics, astronomy, anatomy, medicine, philosophy, psychology, and more. He has been called the father of modern optics and the founder of experimental physics. Attesting to his many accomplishments, his 7-volume Book of Optics, 1011 to 1021. Explained principles with applications ranging from ophthalmology to astronomy to meteorology. As it pertains to meteorology, his work is important for explaining such concepts as reflection, refraction, transparency, translucence, radiancy, and optical illusions. Example: mirages. He made contributions to the study of rainbows and atmospheric density.
Are stories about fish, frogs, and insects raining down from the skies real?
While the old saw about raining cats and dogs is just an expression, there have been reliable reports of very strange rains during which people are pummeled by frogs, grasshoppers, fish, and other bizarre creatures. For instance, in 1873 it was reported in a Scientific American article that frogs fell from the sky during a storm in Kansas City, Missouri. Both frogs and toads rained down on Minneapolis, Minnesota. During a 1901 storm, more recently, in 1995, a frog storm was reported in Sheffield, England. One possible explanation for amphibian rain is waterspouts carrying frogs and toads up into the air, where prevailing winds then dump them onto a distant location. The same sort of theory might apply to reports of raining fish. A couple living in Folsom, California, for instance, reported a fish rain in September 2006, and earlier that year a similar eyewitness account came from Manna, India. Scientists were not incredulous, explaining that waterspouts can kick up winds of 200 miles. 320 kilometers per hour that have been known to lift objects as big as sailboats. Other creatures, such as birds and flying insects, have been victims of weird weather, as well. It's not too much of a mental leap to conceive birds being caught in a strong storm that could injure or disorient them, causing them to fall out of the sky. Insects such as grasshoppers and crickets could just as easily be victims of such storms. In 1988, for example, meteorologists speculated that a swarm of red grasshoppers in Africa was caught up in strong winds and blown all the way to the Caribbean, where they landed in a massive insect rain shower.
Who first proposed the approach of numerical weather prediction?
Wilhelm Bjerknes, 1862–1951, a Norwegian physicist and meteorologist. Was the author of the first formal studies on weather forecasting. He was also famous for his seminal 1921 book, On the Dynamics of the Circular Vortex with applications to the atmosphere and to atmospheric vortex and wave motion, which proposed the fundamental ideas behind numerical weather prediction in 1904. The theory was picked up again in 1922 by English mathematician and meteorologist Lewis F. Richardson. 1881–1953, the mathematics behind Bjerknes's theory appealed to Richardson, but the calculations necessary to come up with the predictions, in a time before the invention of the computer, were formidable. Richardson estimated it would take a coordinated effort of about 26,000 people using calculators to figure out the math fast enough for the numerical method to work. Trying to do some preliminary calculations himself. Richardson's early attempts at weather predictions were far off the mark. His misunderstanding of some of Bjerknes's numerical methods led him to come up with estimates on air pressure that were far too high. Because of Richardson's failure, numerical weather prediction was abandoned until the 1940s.
What is the intertropical convergence zone?
The Intertropical Convergence Zone, ITCZ, is a band around our planet where the winds from the southern and northern hemispheres rub against each other. The resulting convergence causes air to rise and is an ideal place for tropical storms to form, generally near the equator. The ITCZ changes position depending on the effects of the sun and seasonal cycles. Usually, there is one ITCZ, but sometimes a double ITCZ can form. Land beneath the ITCZ receives much more rain, up to 200 days annually, than land areas outside the zone, and shifts in the zone can lead to wet or dry weather.
Who initially proposed the idea of moving continents?
The idea of the continents moving around our planet was mentioned as early as 1587 by the Flemish mapmaker. With German origins, Abraham Ortelius, 1527–1598, in his work Thesaurus Geographicus. In 1620, Francis Bacon, 1561–1626, also mentioned the idea, noting the fit of the coastlines on both sides of the Atlantic Ocean. By the 1880s, many other scientists were mentioning the connection. For example, in 1885, Australian geologist Edward Suess, 1831–1914, proposed that the southern continents had once been a huge land mass that he called Gondwanaland. But it was German scientist Alfred Wegener, 1880–1930, who first formally published the idea of continental displacement, or drift, in his 1915 book, The Origins of Continents and Oceans. He believed the continents were once joined together into one supercontinent, a place he named Pangaea. Also spelled Pangaea, meaning all land, that was surrounded by a superocean called Panthalassa. He also suggested that the massive continent divided about 200 million years ago, with Laurasia moving to the north and Gondwana, or Gondwanaland, to the south. Wegener based his ideas of continental motion on numerous observations. The continental distribution of fossil ferns called Glossopteres, from studies by Seuss, the discovery of coal in Antarctica by Sir Ernest Henry Shackleton. 1874 to 1922, similar glacial erosion seen in the tropical areas of India, South Africa, and Australia, the apparent fit of the South America and West African continental shorelines. And, although it may only be legend, by watching ice floes drifting on the sea. Although Wegener is now considered the man who started a revolution in geology, his ideas were hotly debated by scientists of his time. Not only was he a meteorologist in a community of geologists, but he could offer no logical mechanism for the movement of the land masses. It wasn't until the 1960s, long after his tragic death in Greenland. He died at the age of 50 while on a rescue mission, that Wegener was vindicated. By then, scientific measurements, observations, and technology had advanced enough to prove that, indeed, the continents are moving around the planet on giant lithospheric plates. Wegener's theory of continental displacement was replaced by the new field of plate tectonics, which is the basis for modern geology.
How did Mikhail Ivanovich Budyko calculate the temperature of Earth's climate?
Mikhail Ivanovich Budyko, 1920 to 2001, was a Belarusian meteorologist and physicist, as well as a pioneer in the specialized field of physical climatology. He was the author of the 1956 book Heat Balance of the Earth's Surface. In this work, he used the principles of physics to explain, as no one had done before, how energy from the sun is absorbed and then radiated back into the atmosphere by the Earth. Budyko's research led him to become concerned about climate change, and he was one of the first to realize that a buildup of carbon dioxide created by human industry was causing the atmosphere to warm up. He predicted that by 2070 the average temperature on Earth would be 6.3 degrees Fahrenheit, 3.5 degrees Celsius, higher than 1950 temperatures. Budyko was also one of the first to predict that a nuclear winter would result from a nuclear war.
Is there a sunspot cycle?
Yes. Sunspot activity goes through a two-cycle pattern of high and low activity. One that lasts about 11 years, more accurately, about 10 years, 6 months, and also an 88-year cycle of highs and lows. And astronomers speculate an even longer pattern might be possible. The first person to observe sunspot cycles was German astronomer Heinrich Samuel Schwab, 1789 to 1875. Originally a pharmacist, Schwab became an amateur and then professional astronomer. Wondering whether there was another planet besides Mercury and Venus close to the Sun, he accidentally discovered sunspots and became completely fascinated by them. From 1825 until near the end of his life, he observed the Sun daily. Recording the number of sunspots he observed. From these observations, he noticed that there were periods of greater and lesser activity, which he thought came in cycles of about 10 years. A fairly close approximation, given the quality of telescopes at the time.
What is the largest known meteor to disintegrate in Earth's atmosphere in recent times?
In the night of June 30, 1908, villagers near the Tunguska River in Siberia witnessed a fireball streaking through the sky. A burst of light, a thunderous sound, and an enormous blast. 1,000 miles away. In Irkutsk, Russia, a seismograph recorded what appeared to be a distant earthquake. This area was so remote, however, that a scientific expedition to the site did not happen until 1927. Incredibly, they found more than 1,000 square miles of burned and flattened forest. Modern scientific computations have shown that this incredible explosion was probably caused by a small rocky asteroid or comet about 100 feet, 30 meters, across. Computer simulations show that it most likely came into Earth's atmosphere at a shallow angle and exploded in mid-air above the forest. The explosion packed a punch easily greater than 1,000 Hiroshima atomic bombs.
How far is it possible to see through the atmosphere?
On a clear day that is free of haze and pollution, it is possible for people to see objects as far as 200 miles, 322 kilometers, away. At night, bright lights can be visible from as far away as 500 miles, about 800 kilometers.
What is smog?
The word smog is a combination of two other words, smoke and fog. Harold de Vos, a British physician who was concerned about air quality, is credited with coming up with coining the term in 1911. However, what we refer to as smog has nothing to do with either fog or smoke, usually. Smog is simply another name for air pollution. Scientists refer to it, more precisely, as photochemical smog because it is the result of chemical reactions in the presence of sunlight. The brownish haze associated with smog is the result of nitrogen dioxide in the air. But smog also includes a soup of nitrogen oxides, hydrocarbons, aldehydes, ozone, peroxyethanoyl nitrates, PANs, and suspended particulate matter. Yuck.
What is permafrost?
Permafrost refers to soil that is frozen all year long. Even during the summer, for 2 consecutive years or more. Such conditions occur in areas where the mean annual temperature is 23 degrees Fahrenheit -5 degrees Celsius or less. Construction in polar regions where permafrost is found can be problematic, because sometimes the ground can thaw beneath a building that was constructed over frozen ground. When this happens, building foundations are easily compromised.
What is a heat burst?
In a manner similar to what happens when a Santa Ana wind rushes down into the low coastal areas of Southern California, a heat burst raises temperatures by compressing air. Usually associated with thunderstorms, heat bursts typically occur during the night when turbulent air from as high up as 20,000 feet is forced downward as a storm begins to break up and dissipate. Meteorologists theorize that this happens when virga, rain that evaporates before reaching the ground, is present in dry, cold air. The resulting denser air is pulled down by gravity, increasing air compression near the ground rapidly and causing temperatures to rise unexpectedly. In Waco, Texas, on June 15, 1960, it was reported that a heat burst caused the temperature to soar to 140 degrees Fahrenheit, 60 degrees Celsius, for a brief period that was accompanied by winds of about 80 miles, 129 kilometers, per hour. More recently, in May of 1996, temperatures rose from about 88 degrees Fahrenheit 31 degrees Celsius to 101 degrees Fahrenheit 39 degrees Celsius. In the towns of Chickasha and Ninica in about 30 to 40 minutes. And on August 3, 2008, Sioux Falls, South Dakota, saw the temperature shoot up from about 72 degrees Fahrenheit 22 degrees Celsius to 101 degrees Fahrenheit 39 degrees Celsius during gusting winds of 50 to 60 miles, 80 to 100 kilometers, per hour. Perhaps most remarkable was a heat burst during the recent heat wave and fires in Australia. On January 29, 2009, at 3 a.m. a heat burst maxed out thermometers at 107 degrees Fahrenheit 41.7 degrees Celsius.
What is the shape of a raindrop?
Although a raindrop has been illustrated as being pear-shaped or tear-shaped, high-speed photographs reveal that a large raindrop has a spherical shape with a hole not quite through it, giving it a donut-like appearance. Water surface tension pulls the drop into the shape. As a drop larger than 0.08 inch, 2 mm, in diameter falls, it will become distorted. Air pressure flattens its bottom and its sides bulge. If it becomes larger than 1/4 inch, 6.4 mm, across, it will keep spreading crosswise as it falls and will bulge more at its sides, while at the same time, its middle will thin into a bow tie shape. Eventually, in its path downward, it will divide into two smaller spherical drops.
How do tides work?
Two cycles of high and low tides occur each day, roughly 13 hours apart. High tides occur both where the water is closest to the moon, and where it is farthest away. At the points in between, there are low tides.
Can you see a tornado using Doppler radar?
No. Doppler radar can tell meteorologists if conditions within a storm are favorable for tornadoes such as strong winds and cloud rotation, but it can't actually see a tornado.
Where do cosmic rays come from?
A continuous stream of electrically charged particles flows from the sun. This flow is called the solar wind. It makes sense that some fraction of cosmic rays originate from the sun. But the sun alone cannot account for the total flux of cosmic rays onto Earth's surface. The source for the rest of these cosmic rays remains mysterious. Distant supernova explosions could account for some of them. Another possibility is that many cosmic rays are charged particles that have been accelerated to enormous speeds by interstellar magnetic fields.
What is one strange warning sign that lightning may be about to strike?
As the static charge begins to build as a precursor to a lightning stroke, people's hair may stand on end and you can feel the static charge in the air. It has also been known to happen that a plastic raincoat will begin to rise into the air, or that a cast fishing line will bizarrely remain suspended in air. Any of these signs are a warning to seek immediate shelter.